apologies and substitutes.
Yes, Convener. Apologies from Councillor Bell with Councillor MacDonald substituting.
Thank you, and welcome to Councillor MacDonald to his first meeting. We'll move on to number 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? No, I'm not seeing. Councillor Duff? No? Right. Great, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to number 3, minutes of the previous meetings, A and B. Are we happy to agree to these minutes?
Yes.
Everybody, brilliant, thank you. Move on to number 4, which is the restoration works at the Steneth landfill site. Let me just get to the papers. Here we go. Have you any questions on this report? Any comments? Sorry, Councillor Proctor.
Thanks very much, Convener. Is there any indication of the cost for this membrane? I mean, it's good to see that Delson Contracts have actually given us a pretty good deal, and you know, we're obviously not spending another, but then this implies later on that there will be a cost incurred for this breathable membrane. I mean, have we got any ideas as to how much that's likely to cost?
I'll ask Mr. Ball or possibly Mr. Daly to address that, please.
I'll address that. Thanks, Councillor Proctor. At the moment, I suppose the short answer to that is no. We need to engage our engineers to survey the site and then give us a cost. So at this stage, we don't know what that will be. What I can say to you is it won't be particularly cheap. So I would imagine that would run into, and I suppose I'm basing this on previous experience, it would run into hundreds of thousands, but it won't be anywhere near the money that's been set aside in the capital plan.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Proctor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question? No.
Councillor Brady, Councillor Devine, Convener, yes.
Yeah, Councillor Devine.
I'm sorry, it's a comment.
Right, any further questions? Councillor Duff?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just, you know, Mr. Ball's given us the picture of the membrane cost. The cost of the earth or whatever that's coming in from Delson's, which is essentially free of charge. I mean, can you give us any idea what that would have cost us if we'd had to go out and find a contractor to give us some earth or supply earth? I mean, what is that worth in total to the total project, roughly speaking? I'm not expecting to have an exact figure, we're just sort of ballpark figure.
Mr. Ball, can I ask you to address that, please?
Yes, again, quite a difficult one to answer, Councillor Duff, without going out to tender, but if we look at Arrott's Mill, you'll know from experience of your sitting on the capital projects monitoring group, I think there's a £75,000 allowance for Arrott's Mill. I think that's a 20-year project, same contractor. Okay. And Steneth is considerably larger than that project. So, you know, it's 163,000 tonnes of material that we're talking about here. So even if we were getting that material at £3 or £4 a tonne, it's £500,000. So it's a considerable saving in the capital budget.
Okay, thanks for that. Thank you.
Councillor Braes, is yours a question? On you go.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I understand from reading the papers that this was referred to legal and democratic and found to be perfectly in order, and I'm quite sure it was. But I do just wonder about the fact that no one else was offered this opportunity. I understand that there might be commercial reasons why when Delson's approached you, you wanted to do a deal with them. But I just thought I would like you to comment on why you decided it wasn't necessary to maybe invite other such companies to offer to do this work.
Mr. Ball, do you want to address that?
Yes, I'm happy to address that, Convener. So a few considerations were taken into account here, Councillor Brays, and I suppose one of the first ones would be the sheer volume of material that's required. So as I mentioned earlier, it's 163,000 tonnes, albeit over, I think, a 13-year period, but that still works out, on average, 1,000 tonnes of material a month. And we know from experience of having to source material for daily cover that that volume of material and also the quality of material is not readily available locally. And as soon as you start getting into importing material from out with Angus and you start getting into transport costs, then it really becomes not an economically viable proposition. So it would really need to be a company that was located within Angus and had that volume of material available. And our experience would show that there's no prospect of any other contractor having that volume of material. The other considerations, it's the quality, as I mentioned earlier. So the quality of material that's used for the final restoration of a landfill site has to be of a certain standard in order to meet the SEPA guidelines. And if it falls below that standard, then SEPA could take enforcement action against the council, which could be very costly. We know from experience of dealing with Delson at its mill that the quality of material that they use is exceptionally high, and therefore we don't anticipate any issues in relation to enforcement action from SEPA. And I suppose finally, it's the fact that we've got an established working relationship with that contractor. They've worked for 7 years at its mill. They know what they're doing, and they would bring that experience with them to the site at Restenneth. But I suppose the main point, in summary, is just the availability and the security of supply, if you like, for that sheer volume of material.
Is that okay, Councillor Brays? You happy with that answer?
Yes, I thought it was important to ask the question in the interest of transparency, and I think Mr. Ball's given a very thorough answer to it, so I'm quite satisfied. Thanks.
Thank you. I asked the same question at pre-agenda, so I was happy with the same answer that's just been given. Anybody else got a question, or will I move on to Councillor Devine, who has a comment? Councillor Devine?
Yeah, it's just a very brief comment, Convener. I do think this is a very good news story. It's great to see a partnership between a private enterprise and the council. And I'm really pleased that there's going to be some wetlands for wildlife birds, and albeit that will be way down the line. But I was wondering if the idea, well, this is actually a question now. I was wondering if the idea was to link it in with the Forfar Path network as well.
We've got Mr. Scott here. I don't know if Walter wants to address that question.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, we'd in terms of our commitment to active travel and our path networks, we'd always be interested in seeking to expand that where possible, particularly when there are opportunities presented to us by a separate project to do so. So that's certainly something we can take an active look into for in that suggestion. So thanks, Councillor Devine.
Thank you. Anybody else got a comment? No? Will we move? Oh, sorry, Councillor Brays?
Yes, just a brief comment. I think this is a fantastic thing for Angus Council. We're saving a lot of money, and I do hope that that we can take full advantage of this by linking into path networks, etc., where it's viable to do so. That's all.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Braze. Anybody else? No. Can we move on to agree both recommendations, please? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Move on to next one, number 5, which is the weight limit on Hayeshead Road in Arbroath. And I apologise for the late recommendation that I'm about to ask the committee to support. So I'll be moving this report and we'd ask the committee to agree that an additional recommendation, which I'm calling number 4, be added to enhance road safety in the displacement area. And the additional recommendations wording is to instruct the Director of Infrastructure and Service Leader, Roads and Transportation, to include the promotion, and if no objections are received, the making of an additional order for a reduction in the speed limit to 40 miles an hour on the following roads, which are currently deregulated at 60 miles per hour, either in the same prohibition order or separate traffic order as appropriate, along with the implementation of signage and lining as required. And it's 1, Bearfalls Road, from the commencement of the deregulated signage at the Meadowbank Inn to the junction with Seaton Road, and secondly, from the junction with Seaton Road to the existing 30 mile an hour boundary signage for Arbroath on Seaton Road. So just to give you a little bit of history here, I was actually born and lived in Arbroath until I was 21. In fact, I actually lived in Hayeshead Road, so therefore I have some local knowledge when I was considering this report. And while I welcome the report, when I first read it, I was immediately concerned about the displacement route that the HGVs would use to arrive at their destination of Seaton Farm or Mayfield Shopping Centre. Seaton Farm is a major fresh fruit supplier to major UK and European supermarkets and has British and foreign HGVs arriving constantly. Unfortunately, sat-nav seems to take them along Hayeshead Road, and the most obvious route would be Bearfalls Road, just off the A92 at the Meadowbank Cafe Restaurant roundabout. Local residents in the Bearfalls Road have been approaching Arbroath East councillors for many years, asking for a 40 mile limit in this area. The road boundaries a major Stuart Milling housing development and has a different fruit farm with workers' accommodation on the other side. It's also the main route to Seaton Caravan Park and the village of Ickmithy for locals and tourists. I'm going to leave Councillor Speed and Durno as the ward members to expand on why they support a new 40 mile limit for this road. I did have a discussion with Councillor Durno yesterday afternoon, and I'm well aware of Councillor Wan and Councillor Speed's views on this section of road. I also believe that the report before us today gives us the opportunity to go one step further in improving road safety in this area by accepting recommendation 4. The Spaces for People project, funded by the Scottish Government, is allowing Angus Council to introduce 20 mile limits in many other villages and town centres. And this should be a catalyst for a wider review of speed limits all over Angus, something the Road Safety MOG is in the process of doing. I'm now going to ask the report author, Walter Scott, to explain the decision for the additional recommendation. And also I'm going to open it up for questions for colleagues on the report before I officially move the report and ask the Vice Convener to second it. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Convener, and thanks for the opportunity to provide additional background. I think you've covered much of the issues there in terms of the primary issue, which was the prohibition of HGVs and the weight limit for Hayeshead Road to try and address the issues with the sat-nav and the routing of vehicles through there. What we'd identified as we went through the development of the report were a number of knock-on issues, and therefore in terms of that holistic approach, we've added recommendations and a further one today in terms of the speed limit to address the particular issues here. So in terms of part of the recommendations in the report, that is to put an advisory HGV route, which we would hope and we anticipate and that we know that the HGV drivers do follow, but in doing so and directing them effectively along the A92 and then up to Bearfalls Road, we recognise the additional burden that might place on that particular stretch of road, and in particular the fact that it so quickly outskirts of the town does turn into a deregulated 60. So the discussion in terms of adding to this report to improve it, to have that holistic approach, came from discussions with members right across the board. So as I say, this is something that we are encouraging as part of our review of the speed limit policy as we build up to that particular review and working with the road safety MOG, that we do want to be open to having the local considerations and certainly those knock-on effects where we have a proposal in one area, what would the impact be in some of the other areas there. I'm conscious in terms of that, Convener, that there is a specific issue here with the Monarch's Rise development. And I've just had an update on that we are anticipating the roads construction consent application very shortly for the next phase, which would provide that link between the existing development and Seaton Road. Clearly that is down to Stuart Milne, the developer, to submit that, but our intelligence on that is due imminently, which will allow that particular part of this particular area to have that fuller pedestrian link from Seaton Road down to the A92.
Thank you. Can I open up for questions, please? Councillor Speed.
Thank you. Yeah, it's firstly, it's nice to be back in a communities committee meeting. Since being elected, I've had a number of constituents in the Hayeshead Road area contact me, you know, kind of ongoing with regards to the impact that the large good vehicles travelling along this stretch has on them. I believe that with this report, it's vital that we listen to our residents who know their communities, places and spaces best, and that we work to ensure that we do design and adapt environments where we can help improve and enhance the safety and enjoyment of an area. As many of you will know, this stretch serves along Hayeshead Road the new Abbey School campus and has the potential to be a key active travel route that many will use if indeed we can shift the focus from vehicle to people. Both residents residing and those who use it will then feel a greater sense of safety and well-being. I think I fully welcome the additional recommendation. I think it's vital that we consider the displacement that's already been described. I think this is one of those scenarios that as an elected member, you listen to residents, to people in one area and also another, and like Hayeshead Road, I've throughout my time as being a member had many residents within the kind of Bear Falls Road, the Stuart Milne, the new development, come to me with regards to concerns they have. I guess just the nature of that area, it was kind of historically kind of on the outskirts of town, and now it's a fairly heavy populated housing development. And the Bear Falls Road, as you know, has been described as a national speed limit, and yet we have a mixed population from young to old who again are voicing that they want to make best use of their space and their environments and environs, and would like to kind of actively travel as well. So the Bear Falls Road stretch, for those that don't know, it is a national speed limit, and it actually has an unfinished footpath. So the housing development actually has a walkway that comes out onto that stretch to an unfinished footpath. So that's an issue, but an issue for the developer to address. But also, I guess, from our point of view, if we can address that speed within this report and recommendations, we would actually then be, I guess, like I say, enhancing two local communities that are actively getting in touch with us to raise their concerns with these areas. So I fully support this report.
Thank you. I was actually doing questions, but I wasn't going to stop you.
Sorry.
It's okay, don't worry. Councillor Durno.
Yes, I had a lot of complaints about the Hayesville Road as well, and obviously we've got the new school there, so this is great if we're not going to have the big lorries going along there. I do have some concerns. The only concern I have is if the roundabout at the Meadowbank occurs to have a fast flood, like, you know, when we have the really heavy rain. There was a time, you know, probably this time last year, we had a really bad flood there. And if that road gets closed again, we don't actually have an alternative route for any HGVs coming from Dundee to turn right as they come into the town. That would be the only thing. That road would have to be made sure that it wasn't going to flood and it was going to have to be kept open, especially if we have any sort of caravan houses going out to Seaton or anything. That's the only road they're going to be able to use. So that will have to be made sure that it won't flood or get blocked off. The roundabout there as well, it's if you're coming in from the Aberdeen side, you're practically on top of the roundabout before you know it. And especially in the dark nights as well. So I do wonder if we could maybe get more alert signs coming up to that, saying there's a roundabout, because if we're going to have a lot of lorries coming up that hill towards the Meadowbank, then maybe we make sure that people are not onto that roundabout before they realise they're on it. So just a wee bit of safety concerns there, but I do welcome this, being done, and I do welcome the taking the speed limit down as well, which is great.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Scott, would you like to just address some of these concerns?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, convener. Yeah, in terms of that, I think we do have to recognise that in displacement, we do have to manage that out. If indeed there was a requirement at any stage, and for whatever reason to close off Bearfolds Road, then it may well be in those rare occurrences that we would be needing to direct vehicles along Hayeshead Road, but that would just be in terms of the safety of any given diversion. In terms of the flooding to the roundabout, the road drainage there can get inundated. Road drainage can't actually be designed to accommodate every single storm, but take the comments on board in terms of needing to ensure that is addressed. And also from Councillor Dooner, thank you for that, in terms of the changes that might occur by having this route. I think that's vital in terms of whatever we do here, that we do have a relatively rigorous review and that we are monitoring the situation. We're not just putting the signs in and leaving them for however they may be responded to. And clearly with the members' interest here, as well as the local interest here, as well as the officer interest here, I'm convinced that we'll have sufficient sight of any changes, any further adaptations or improvements that we can make in the future.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Duff?
Yeah, thanks, convener. I'm not really sure whether this is a question or a comment.
Go for it.
I mean, I know the area moderately well, and I can understand the rationale behind the measure. I'm conscious also that we've set up a road safety member officer group. The slight concern I have is that this, every member is going to be approached by residents in their own area wanting something similar in all sorts of roads. And rather than doing this in a sort of planned, cohesive way, we're going to have all sorts of, random requests. And I know there's one road near me which I think has got an advisory sign, not, HGVs not recommended. And that's certainly, at the time, upset quite a few road haulage companies and businesses nearby. So I would have thought there might have been some merit in having these requests filtered through the road safety MOG, so that we could have some sort of almost consistent rationale, rather than we respond to every. We'll have a campaign, I'm sure, somewhere else. Let's clear HGVs off this road, and we inevitably we'll get a lot of press exposure, and we'll all get requests. And I just wonder about how we're going to manage that. I don't know, it's maybe a question, it's maybe for the question for Mr. Scott, but just a slight concern I have that we're all going to now be inundated with lots of complaints to ban trucks from here, there and everywhere.
Convener, quite happy to come in there if that's okay.
Yeah, on you go.
Yeah, I think Councillor Duff, you're right. I think the issue here is how holistic we are in any approach that we take. So we've got an issue here on Hayeshead Road that we've addressed. What we've then done is look at what the ripple effect and the displacement effect might be, and then identified there's an issue with one of the local roads on the boundary of the town. In a similar way, this could be some form of catalyst for further interest elsewhere. And what I would say in that regard is that we, rather than seeing those as complaints, they are opportunities to make our roads safer and make our roads better. So we're always interested in hearing those. We do need to manage the expectations, and you're right to identify how critical the road safety MOG will be on that. One of the, as a reminder to the committee, one of the actions of that particular member officer working group is to review the speed limit policy for Angus Council. But the approach to that is, rather than rewriting it in its entirety, what we are doing over a series of modifications that we will be building up to that refresh. And therefore, these improvements to how we do things, this holistic approach is very much part of the thinking for a speed limit policy. So we're not looking at isolated issues, whilst we're quite happy to deal with things on an issue basis. We're quite aware in terms of that, and the consistency approach we would bring through as officers in terms of the recommendations, and in sharing that development with the members, we'd also look for that consistency of decision making as we move forward, as that develops through the council committees.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Braze?
Sorry, convener, it's more a comment. I thought we were at that.
On you go. I don't think there's any further questions. So off you go. Comment, please.
Yes, well, I do take on board fully what Councillor Duff said. There has to be some consistency and order as we go forward, and yes, we will be discussing that in the MOG, as Mr. Scott's indicated. So I'm pleased about that. I would say that as a general comment, and I've never used this before, I think it's really important that we take cognizance, more cognizance, of the views of our communities who are living there with traffic, and maybe give them a wee bit more weight in the argument over the motorists and drivers who are hurtling through. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a comment I would share, and I think that's something you and I can work with together on the road safety MOG when we're relooking at the policies with our other colleagues that are on the MOG. Is there anybody else? No. Well, if everybody's happy, I'm going to move the report with the additional recommendation as I read out, and I would ask Councillor Stewart to second, please.
Yeah, happy to second this report, convener, and indeed the additional recommendation. I don't think there's much more to say. Everybody else has covered everything. The reducing the road from 60 to 40 mile an hour, it can only be seen as a good thing. So I'm happy to support it.
Thank you very much. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to agenda item 6, which is the winter service policy and provision for 2020-21. Now, last night when I was having a discussion with Councillor Devine on the weight limit for Hayeshead Road, we had a discussion about this report. And I know that Councillor Devine and our group have some issues and questions. So I'm not going to move the report at the moment. I'm going to move to Councillor Devine and ask her if she would like to ask the officers the relevant questions she feels her and our group wish to ask. And then I'll open it up to all colleagues if they have further questions.
Thanks, convener. I would really rather Councillor Braze dealt with this because he's...
Sorry.
Yes. I'll leave it to him. He's
right. Councillor Braze.
Councillor Hands.
Yes, we actually thought of asking for a deferment, but we don't want to delay operational planning in this very important matter. We feel we can't agree to the report as is, and would like an amendment to the recommendations. Now, obviously, we've had a very little time to consider this before, so I wondered if that would be acceptable to you.
Well, if you can let us know what the amendment is, please.
Yes, well, I can. Can I email that to Mr. McCaskill right now?
Yeah, I think you better give it to Mr. Scott and Mr. Cochrane and possibly myself as well. Or actually probably maybe give it to Mr. McCaskill. Ask Mr. McCaskill, could you send it to all of the members on the committee?
Well, I think Andrew's all set up. I think I think convener, first of all, before it's, I think it would be appropriate for Councillor Brace, if he has that in format, to verbally intimate that, to give members at least a flavour of what's intended. Depending on the terms of that, we may need a short adjournment to take advice from both legal colleagues, roads and finance. But if I could, convener, through yourself, ask Councillor what the terms of his amendment is.
Well, it's two recommendations, and we wanted a recommendation. Approve the policy for the winter service during the forthcoming winter as stated in Appendix 2, having due regard to meeting the ongoing requirements of the general equality duty, and therefore, if necessary, allows for a flexible COVID-19 response determined by need and severity of weather, ensuring access to local food shops, medical centres and chemists, etc., to ensure no protected group is disadvantaged by this policy.
Convener, I think, bearing in mind that members have not had sight of this beforehand, and I appreciate maybe officers either, if Councillor Brace could email that proposed amendment to Andrew Wilson AS, and Andrew, as clerk, could you forward that email to the relevant officers? I would ask convener if we could, whether it's appropriate, if you would say for a 5-minute adjournment, so that as officers we can take into consideration the terms of that. It might be a bit of a hassle with Zoom, but that's just my suggestion, unless members just want to sit.
Yeah, I think that's probably appropriate because there's quite a lot in that amendment, and there could be financial implications, and I'm just wondering if it's been run past the finance department under section, I think, is it section something, there has to be financially competent. So I think, I'm not sure if Mr. Councillor Brace has spoken to the finance team to get their agreement to his amendment.
No, I haven't, but the intention is to not to take that out of the existing, any change we had to make in view of COVID developments would have to come out of the existing winter maintenance programme. So there wouldn't be a financial implication.
There are quite a few implications to this, but I think the officers need to have a discussion, and then we need some advice. So yes, Mr. McCaskill, I think we need to have a 5-minute.
Just remind members that in terms of standing order, there is an obligation on members to bring forward any amendment and submit that to officers. In terms of standing order 16.9, it is for the proper officer from the finance service to determine if there are or not any financial implications. And I think that it's appropriate for me to remind members that should have been with officers before this meeting, so we would have been able to assess that and give advice on the day. But if Councillor Brace could email it to Andrew, then we can maybe convener have a 5-minute to 10-minute adjournment.
Can you give me some advice then as the convener about the competency then of this amendment if it's not been submitted and I went through the process that you've just outlined under the standing order?
I think, convener, in terms of standing orders, there is an obligation for members to submit a notice of amendment prior to this meeting, but really our finance officer here, Mr. Lumsden, may well want to, there are essentially a number of factors that need to be taken into consideration, finance being one, legal being another, competency as well. So there are a range of issues that we need, as officers, we need to discuss, but purely from the financial side of things, maybe Mr. Lumsden might want to comment on that.
Thanks, Donald. Yeah, I can confirm what the conveners said, that finance, as far as I know, have not seen sight of this amendment. So I would certainly welcome 5 minutes to have a discussion with roads officers in particular about the potential implications of this, to determine whether there are or aren't any potential financial implications that need to be taken into account.
Okay, we'll go into a 5-minute recess.
Convener, in terms of just managing this, sorry, are you hearing me okay?
I'm hearing you, yes.
It's a choice of whether everybody, other than yourself, the Vice Convener, Finance, Legal, Roads and the Clerk, remain in the Zoom meeting, and all other members and press leave the meeting from IT host. I think that might be...
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way forward.
So could I ask...
do we want to say 10 minutes? I think 5 minutes is probably unrealistic. So do we want to say 10 minutes?
And Convener, if I may, I still don't have a copy of the amendment. So before we break, we're going to need that circulated from Councillor Brays, please.
For the longer time that we've actually taken, you can understand there was a lot to discuss and a lot of information to be provided to myself from the different service directors and officers present. First of all, I'd like to really say that I'm a bit disappointed that this amendment has been brought forward the way it is, because we have professional officers who are available to give advice to any elected member if they are putting together a motion or an amendment. And I'm aware that there are a lot of experienced councillors in the SNP group as they meet. So there is a lot of a knowledge base there. I'm just really a bit annoyed that this has been brought at the last minute on such an important subject. And it's the motion is really not well put together at all. And for Councillor Bray should really be engaging with the professional officers to put this together. So having listened to the officers present and taken on board their comments, I'm going to rule that this does not comply with Standing Order 16.9, which means it's financially incompetent. So that's the ruling that I'm making on this matter. I intend to move the report as is, but before I do that, I'm going to ask Mr. Cochrane to speak to certain parts of the report and just give colleagues comfort that this council is taking COVID-19 seriously, and this was factored in the preparation of this report. So I'm going to pass over to Mr. Cochrane.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I'd just like to point out that there's no change to our winter maintenance policy. This is the existing policy, but in accordance with the Code of Practice for Well-Maintained Highways, it's recommended that we bring it to you every year, and we've traditionally done that. The policy itself has already previously been assessed in terms of EIA, as indeed all existing council policies were previously, and that is updated. I think the last update was a couple of years ago. I don't have the exact details. And clearly we see everything at the moment through the lens of COVID-19. So in saying that, the challenge obviously of the winter maintenance policy is really to deal with the weather conditions as and when they occur on the physical road infrastructure. And our policy that has been in place for several years is to do that in terms of the roads usage and the hierarchy of the road network and the elements that they serve in terms of retail, schools and health services. That, however, does not mean that we can deliver that service to absolutely every local shop, etc. But it is, as we've said, based on the policy that we have on that hierarchy, based on the well-maintained highways code of practice, and of course in light of our financial constraints and our budgets. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Sorry, Councillor Proctor, were you? Councillor Proctor.
Convener, thank you. Mr. Cochrane, thank you. Just looking in the report, I'm looking to the future, and we are looking at, you know, the monitoring of the costs in paragraph 5.6, and I would just say one thing, that I do feel that after what's been said and everything else, but I need some reassurance about the maintenance, the clearing of the rural routes I'm talking about, particularly up the Angus Glens, which not only facilitate people getting from the glens to maybe their work, but also on tourism. And I'd hope that maybe the commitment that we've given in the past will be continued to be given in the future. I think it's great that we've managed to save £6,000 on the using 4x4s as stated in paragraph 4, and maybe that could be widened. I question, can that be widened out?
Thank you, Convener, for yourself. I think if
sorry.
you wish me to answer that. Well, first of all, future commitments is dependent on the council setting future budgets, and whilst I would wish to support as much roads maintenance and winter maintenance as we can, that is obviously dependent on the council's financial situation and, as I say, the setting of future budgets. So I can't give that commitment beyond obviously the services desire to do so. In terms of the savings that we've made on the change from 6x6 vehicles to 6x4s, we are constantly looking at savings, and that's an area that we've made those savings. However, they are of course a one-off saving. That having made that change, those savings won't be available in future years to make the same saving. But we do recognise the challenges on the council's budget, and winter maintenance being quite a significant budget in that we constantly look at areas that we can reduce the costs, but that is and has become harder and harder every year until the point we're actually at just now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cochrane.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Durno.
I just like to ask Mr. Cochrane, with the fact that so many people are going to be working at home this winter, does that not mean that we're going to have less gritting, etc., of like industrial estates and things like that? Could we maybe save from the gritting of industrial estates if nobody's working there, and maybe do a little bit more in the villages then?
Thank you. I would suggest we don't grit too much in industrial estates in the first place. So they would be some of the non-priorities. So it's difficult to suggest that we would be making savings from that. And of course, so again, if we go back to the basics, that the priority routes are our ABs and class roads into our town centres, to our schools. Then we're anticipating that there's still a demand for that into this year.
Right. Okay.
Anybody else? Councillor Devine.
Thanks, Convener. I think on behalf of the group, we'd like to apologise for the mess up really vis-a-vis the standing orders. We were really up against time, and we would normally have amendments in by 5 o'clock the night before, and it just wasn't really possible on this occasion. I'll not go into all the details on that. I have just a couple of questions on page 17, 3.2.3, and it's really just a matter of, and in a way it follows Councillor Durno's point about the heavily trafficked sections. These might be different this year for because of COVID-19 and the way people are working and travelling or not travelling. And I think what we were really looking for was some kind of assurance that need would be taken into account, not just numbers. And then at 3.2.4, I know that we are trying to encourage self-help measures in the rural areas. Are we convinced we have enough volunteers to do this?
Firstly, Councillor Vine, can I just thank you for the apology on behalf of the SNP group. I don't like having to make these kind of decisions either and rule things incompetent. Obviously, we're living in a democracy and we want to have free speech, but as the convener, I have to uphold the standing orders of the council. But thank you very much for the apology. Can I ask Mr. Cochrane to address Councillor Devine's points, please?
Thank you, Councillor Convener. Thank you, Councillor Devine. Councillor Devine, I suppose the challenge around that is that we are already seeing the traffic on our A-class and B-class roads returning to a degree of normality. We're certainly seeing the HGVs. Our bus services are now back up to virtually full operation. Our schools are back. So all of those elements are where we deliver our winter maintenance service. So it would be very difficult to take into account or suggest that we would stop doing a service somewhere else in order to look at treating a lower classification of road. We have no evidence to suggest that the routes that we currently use and treat are going to be underutilised. So I hope that helps address your first question. In terms of your second one, we would always look to see more self-help. We preferably would never have enough. We have a limited number of community groups. It's true to say we're indebted to those community groups who step forward, particularly in a crisis, and particularly when we have exceptional weather, the proverbial beast from the east. What tends to happen is that they respond very, very well, and we're very grateful for them, but they don't, they're not there routinely, and they tend to respond to the snow events. And obviously, a lot of this policy is, and indeed what we treated last year, not a huge amount of snow, but we did have repeated nights where road surface was freezing, and as a result we gritted, and clearly the community groups weren't as heavily involved last year. But we're always looking for volunteers, and maybe if that can be reinforced through Mr. Brown and the press, we would be delighted to hear from them.
Any other comments?
Could I just come back on the first point?
Yeah, of course.
Accepting that things are getting back to something called normality. I think one of the reasons we wanted to bring forward the COVID-19 thing was that we don't know how this virus is going to work in the winter. It could be bad. It could take us back into a second wave. And we just wanted to make sure that that was being factored in to thoughts, because it could all change again. That's all.
Mr. Koch, no, Mr. Scott, do you want to give some comfort to that question?
I think again, we would accept what you're saying, Councillor Devine, that obviously we're in a substantially unknown scenario, and talk of the second wave, particularly associated to winter. I think though that as I say, we have to take into account that the roads that we treat are the ones that are substantially used, almost irrespective of traffic flows. So, if traffic reduces by 50%, it reduces by 50% on all roads. And therefore, within that, the criteria for the roads that we're treating still remains the same. And I think we also need to accept that there's an element that users are absolutely used to which roads get treated. So they will know that the A-class road or the B-class road at the end of their street gets treated, and therefore there would still be an expectation that that is the route. And we do obviously do publicity ahead of winter to say which are our priorities. So it's challenging to change that as the event unfolds. I think equally, I think we hear the challenge around, you know, local communities needing to access local facilities, and you know, again in a severe snow event, then that is something that we can consider in a COVID environment.
Thank you. Councillor Cheap, I think you had your hand up.
Sorry, just still trying to get used to that.
Hey, don't worry.
Yeah, thanks for that, Convener. It's just in relation to the self-help schemes that have been raised to this paper, which I think was a really good paper overall, and the appendices. Page 20, para 4.3 and page 42, para 8 refer to the self-help schemes. And it's really the use of grit bins that come up again and again for me as a local councillor here. And I'm glad to see that the council have committed to that the use of grit bins will be encouraged in rural areas, and if we can get people to help, as Mr. Corcoran has said, great. But I've requested these before, particularly on the areas in the periphery of town or in the villages that surround Carnoustie, and I've had them rejected. So it's kind of flies in the face of that. So I'd like to see a commitment that when they're saying they are going to encourage them, if we ask because local residents have said that they will use them for spreading in areas, that we would actually agree to supply them. I'd just like to get some sort of commitment from the officers that would be the case if requested again.
Mr. Corcoran.
Thank you again, Convener. Thank you, Councillor Cheap. We have circumstances in which case we provide grit bins such as tight bends or uphill sections, and we clearly don't provide them on roads that we already treat ourselves. Similarly, we don't apply them, provide them for unadopted roads and the like. So I hope that gives you some comfort that they're provided where they are seen to be needed. I'm afraid I can't talk about the specifics of where it may have been asked previously, but if you'd like to email me separately, I can ensure that officers give you a response as to why they've been declined, if that's been the case.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Convener. Just 2 points. And it's great to actually see again back in paragraph 4, operational aspects that we're continuing to work with our neighbours, and we've got a standardisation of sand and grit, and that's really good because that really cuts down the costs quite a lot. And I know full well where in my ward we kind of border on the other local authorities that you know, the gritting just doesn't stop at the county boundary, and that's really good to see. And just on the point of volunteers, we certainly have in my ward quite an active team of people who have been supplied with grit bins by council officers who manage to do their own stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Councillor Braze?
And Councillor Moore as well, Convener.
Sorry, I can't see him, so I couldn't see his hand. That's you on, Councillor Braze.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Yes, Councillor Devine did apologise for the way in which we had to bring forward a proposed amendment. And I'm sorry that we had to do it that way. I'm also very sorry that you chose to so publicly criticise the quality of my work. I thought it was a wee bit disappointing. That's all.
I'm sorry you feel that way, but obviously I have feelings as well, which I wish to express. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Convener. Sorry you can't see me. My camera seems to have gone duff for the afternoon. I've been listening to Mr. Corcoran saying about substantially used roads. But unfortunately, when you talk about rural roads, and you only have A class, C class, B class, unclassified, I don't know what roads you're talking about. I don't know whether there are roads that affect my ward or roads that don't, which is unfortunate. I can see Bractellow Mill there, so I know one. But I'm looking at all this priority treatment. And on a weekend, it seems that Letham, the sheltered housing on Dundee Road and the pathways up to the pharmacy on Blair's Road aren't getting treated. So unfortunately, the people who need their prescription on a Saturday can't go and get it if it's not good weather, because we're not gritting. And in Freakham, I see we've got Gardine Street and Westgate. Have you heard of the Freak Hub? Centre of the village community it's becoming. And it's on Eastgate. And I would have thought that that should be coming in to consideration when we're talking about the gritting. Because if people can't get to it, the community is not working together. And if the community does work together, then you're likely to get volunteers to grit. So I'd ask that you review Letham and Freakham and possibly talk to me about them outside the meeting.
Mr. Cochrane, do you want to comment?
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Councillor Moore. I think members will recall that I think it's now, I have to say, time slips. So it's either 2 or 3 years ago that we had to review winter maintenance service for footways based on the budget and the budget reductions that we were experiencing as a council. And members had the challenging decisions between budget cuts in winter maintenance or other cuts in other services. And we re-looked at those services, and I have to say there's no change to that this year. I would support Councillor Moore in terms of, as he says, places like the Freakham Hub would be ideal for self-help from the community. And perhaps if I may go back to comments from Councillor Cheap and Councillor Proctor, some years ago we had Carnoustie Snowbusters, who were one of the, and a similar group in Kirry, who were some of the leading lights in communities doing self-help, whereby we were actually not just grit bins, we were actually supplying ton bags of salt to be used in the area. And I would have thought that was an ideal opportunity for places like Freakham to assist in terms of helping the community. Unfortunately, we do not have the budget to be everywhere all of the time on winter maintenance, and therefore we prioritise the routes that we can. In terms of which routes we prioritise, I would also add that we have an interactive map on our website, so people can go and see which of their routes get treated. I trust that assists committee.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Can I come back on that, please, Convener?
Yes, on you go.
Yeah. I know we have interactive maps so people can see, but the point I'm trying to make is that if you're not gritting Dundee Road and you're not gritting Blair's Road on a weekend, people cannot get to the healthcare facilities. There is a health centre that is behind the sheltered accommodation on Dundee Road. There is the sheltered accommodation on Dundee Road itself, Jubilee Park and Jubilee Court, and the pharmacy is up Blair's Road. Now, I would have thought that we should be looking at helping people to get access to healthcare facilities, not writing it off like we did 2 years ago.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Convener. Not sure why there appears to be a faint aroma of aggression in here in this meeting. The comeback that I think that you gave to Councillor Bray's potentially flew close to the wind of the Councillor's Code of Conduct in terms of respect, as you don't know and didn't know the context as to why the suggested amendment was brought forward. And it came from a place of actually trying to sort of, through our equality spokesperson for the SNP, look at what we were doing as a council to help our communities. It wasn't meant as a political thing. It wasn't meant as to say we're doing things wrong. And it's pleasing to hear from officers that we're looking at things through a COVID perspective as well. And that there is that bespoke sort of, to use sort of Walter Scott's words, a bespoke look at things if we need to bring them forward. I think Councillor Durno raised a good point, and Councillor Devine furthermore, with regards to the changing nature of work. And I take on board from officers that we're seeing road traffic increase. Now, of course, we might go back into some sort of lockdown like we've seen in Aberdeen and Dundee, and we're going to have to, I think, have a look at those things. But, you know, when we're doing these meetings, I certainly don't walk into these wanting to start a fight with anybody. And we're working through a very difficult set of circumstances to try and facilitate group meetings behind the scenes. And time is very difficult to sometimes get everything you need to be done in time for a Tuesday meeting. And, you know, Councillor Devine said that she wouldn't want to go into the background behind it. But I think when we're going forward, I would appreciate it if we just took a little bit of a look at some of the intentions behind things, because that's certainly where we came from. It was from a place of positivity and trying to help. Councillor Moore makes a very good point about access to doctor surgeries and things like that. Again, that comes back into where we were trying to look at was making sure we had the right options going with the current lifestyle we're living.
Of course, Councillor MacDonald, I apologise if anybody's unhappy with the words that I've used to express myself, but there is processes involved in bringing amendments and motions, and you know, I think councillors are aware of these, and these have to be followed. I mean, there's nobody more than me wants people to bring forward debates and discussions at meetings, but they have to follow the processes to allow the officers to assess them, and these are done days before the meetings.
Yeah, right. I respect that, Chair. I respect that, Chair. However, you went into the personal territory. You went and called someone out. You dug them out. Now, we could have actually got into a position where we looked at the motion, declared it incompetent, but you actually dug someone out there. I don't think that's respectful. I don't think that follows the councillor's code of conduct.
I think I've just apologised if anybody feels that I've used words that's inappropriate, but I'd still say that we need to follow the processes, and hopefully today we understand that we speak to our officers, our professional officers, if we want to bring amendments or motions, and we get guidance from these officers on how the appropriate wording can be used. They're financially checked by our finance team, our legal team, our committees team, and then we can bring them and we can freely discuss any motion or amendment, and of course they would then be competent if being passed by all these different officers. I think that's the point I want to make. Is there anybody else that would like to, sorry, Councillor Brace.
Yes, just one comment, and you may well have been within standing orders, but the fact is that you brought your amendment to a previous agenda item and gave us very little notice indeed. It arrived today.
Can I just go back on that? I spoke to your leader last night by phone. I spoke to Councillor Durno yesterday afternoon. I spoke with the officers by doing that, and obviously that's been accepted. There was minimal financial implications to that road safety addition.
It still could have been sent to me personally much sooner than it was if you chose to, because you've known this was coming for quite some time.
Not, unfortunately, not some quite. It's just been done recently as an additional improvement. But is there anybody else wants to make? Councillor Speed.
Thank you. I'm unmuted, thank you. It was just to say that, yeah, I think there's been lots of valuable points being made, you know, that are imperative to how we want our plan, not just from a roads point of view, but from a health and social care, well-being point of view. And I've absolutely no doubt that each and every one of us around this table wants the very best for all residents in Angus, regardless of where they stay, and certainly are most vulnerable. I think just to pick up on a couple of the points in particular that have been made with regards to, you know, any winter planning that we do at any time, you know, is often unpredictable because we can never tell just how things will go in terms of weather, in terms of health, and even more so, have we ever been, you know, we've probably never been faced with the winter that we do have ahead because of COVID-19. And I think to pick up on Mr. Cochrane's point that he made and everybody else's that followed with regards to, I guess, we can't do this alone, and that, we will at times have to look to our communities to help us out and to respond. And again, this year they have showed, quite remarkably this year, just what they can do. So I guess that would be my plea to our communities, that, there's been a lot asked of them this year, much more than normal. And really we'll probably all just need to catch some breath over the next few weeks as we head into the winter months, and hopefully we can all just stock up on porridge and energy to get through it. But yeah, I really do believe that each and every one of us round the table, and indeed throughout Angus, we just need to forge ahead and all be in this together, and hopefully we will come out of winter into the better months and better days ahead, stronger. Thank you.
Anybody else? No, I think we'll end on the positive comments of Councillor Speed there. As there's no amendment, the motion is approved. Okay, and that's the end of the meeting. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Could I have my dissent recorded, please, convener?
You can. I'll leave Mr. McCaskill to.
Yes, I can confirm that, convener. Councillor Bray's dissent will be recorded.
Got it. Okay, end the meeting. Thank you very much.